Hello and welcome to this tutorial on processing images in the fog with fall foliage. So first I just want to preface this video with the fact that I start off with raw files. So if you're using JPEGs, there's already some information that the camera has embedded into your file, contrast, dark and light, things that have already happened, algorithms that your camera set up automatically. So in this case, you can see my image is actually pretty flat. It's because it's a a raw file, which means I need to make all those decisions for myself. So we're going to start off with this particular image, really foggy day. We're going to see if we can bring out the trees, maybe lessen a little bit of the fog, and give this image some life. So let's get started. First thing I like to do is duplicate the image so that I'm not working directly on the background copy. That's just in case I make decisions that I don't like. It's easy to go back if I need to. So we can go ahead and do that. You can see it says background here on the right. You can either grab this background layer and left click and hold and drag down to this little icon, and you'll see that it created a background copy. Or if you like to do the keystrokes, it's Command or Control J, depending on whether or not you're using a Mac or a PC. So now that we have a background layer, we can start to play around a bit. If you're using the Creative Cloud, one of my favorite features is the fact that there's a camera raw filter. So let's start with that. If you're not, and you open up your file and you get into camera raw, then this is exactly the same place. We're looking at the same thing, so it doesn't really matter how you get here. Now from here you can see that there's really no contrast. So first thing I might do is start to add contrast to the image. And as I do that, you can already see that the color is starting to pop a little bit. Maybe bring down, in this particular case, the exposure a wee bit, just because the sky was so cloudy that bringing down the exposure takes some of the white out. And we're going to go ahead and boost up some contrast. And I think for now that's going to be it. Now you can see here that I have already brought out quite a bit of color, but I haven't touched vibrance or saturation. I don't think we need to yet. Generally, I like to actually avoid that and do it in a different way, which I will show. One thing we might check here is whether or not we have enough whites and blacks. So in this side, you can see where I'm hovering in the top right-hand corner right here on the histogram. On the left, there's no data in the band that I've highlighted on the darks, and there's no data here on the band that I've highlighted on the whites. So we're going to go ahead and drag the white slider a little bit to the right. And basically what we're doing is pushing data into that, pushing data over and filling sort of out the fact that there were no whites here. So let's go ahead. If you hold down the Alt key while you slide this, you can see it goes to a black screen, but when you start to see dots, that means you're starting at the top. See the blue lines at the top? Well, we want to be just prior to that. Okay, so there's our white data. We're going to see what happens. We may not end up keeping this adjustment. Now we're going to hold down the Alt key again, and we're going to drag the black slider back to the left. Again, getting data out into the blacks where we didn't have any. What happens here, I'm going to go a lot so you can see it. You can see that it starts getting color. We'll just back that off so that disappears. All right, see what we got. All right, so that's actually not too bad. Kind of keeping our color there. It kind of actually came back, but now we have a full histogram, so we have data in all of the channels we want them. Go ahead and hit OK. Now you can see from that, if you just toggle this on and off, that's our original file, and this is where we are now, and we've only done camera raw. So that's pretty good. So let's also do a curves adjustment. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a dodging adjustment. So what you do is you choose the layer adjustment, you pick curves, and then you drag the curve down a bit. Now right off the bat, I could frankly leave it just like that, and I'm still going to probably want to do some dodging. It might be a little severe, but if we bring it up, that's actually not a bad adjustment all by itself. So why don't we go ahead and actually leave that as it is, and we're not going to make that a dodge layer yet. But what we are now going to do is create another one. So we're going to pick curves again, and this one's going to be our dodge. So we're going to go ahead and bring it down, make it darker, and we're going to make sure that on curves 2, that the mask, this is a mask, even though it's self-created by the layer adjustment, it's the same kind of mask you might add if you click this little guy down here at the bottom right. We're going to make sure that that's black instead of white. Now white reveals, black hides. So right now that curve that I created, dragging this down and darkening everything, is being shown on the image. And the reason is because it's a white mask. If we go ahead and make that a black mask, then that's going to hide and we can paint it in where we want it, which is what we're going to do here. So to make this mask go from black to white, you can do Command and or Control I. And you'll see that now the mask is black and we're back to the image that we created a second ago. There's no change when I click on and off on this mask. We're going to go ahead and double click where it says Curves to and write Burn. We do that just so we can remember that that's a dark mask, a dark curve as opposed to a light curve, which is what we're going to create now. So go ahead, choose Curves one more time. And this time, instead of dragging down, we're going to drag up. All right, so you can see everything got brighter. Again, much like the burns layer, we actually want this to be a black mask. So we're going to do the Control or Command I again and turn it off. And the reason we do that is so that we can paint that adjustment in to the extent that we want. And we didn't necessarily want it to be everywhere, because right now this is pretty close, but we want to bring out a few more features of the image. So we're going to start on the burns, or actually before we do that, we're going to go ahead and call this dodge. All right, dodging and burning is a technique that's been used, throughout time in the dark room, and this is how we do it when we get into the digital world. So by creating these two, we've created the ability to paint in the dark and light where we're going to want this to be. So we're going to start on the burn. That's just me. I like to start in the burn layer. Makes me happy. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that on a dark mask, when we want to reveal something, we want to paint white. So our foreground right here is set to white, and we want to be in the brush, and we're going to go pick a brush. And what I've done here is I pick a fairly decent sized brush with no hardness. I'll go ahead and click that. And we can make this any size we want at this point. The other thing is we want our opacity at 100%, but our flow to be low. And the reason we do that is so that we can actually add as much as we want, but we're going to do it instead of having it get everywhere quickly. By having a low flow, it actually takes a couple of swipes to fill in what you want, but it gives you some more control. So with this, we're going to just start painting. And as you can see, I've already started to sort of darken up this little area here. All right. And there is no right or wrong to this. Basically, I'm only painting in the areas that I want to see affected. You may choose on your image to, even if you had the exact same image, you might choose to do this completely differently than I am. So right now I'm making my brush really small so that I can be a little bit more selective on this pine tree, which is frankly the reason I took the photo, because I really dug this little pine tree kind of clustered in and around all this color. And because the pine tree can't be dark by itself or it'll look ridiculous. Step back here, there we go. I'm gonna do the tree in front of it as well, just because. And then go back and focus a little bit more on the pine tree. All right. So there's our pine tree. Now we're going to go around and just start adding some darkness to some of the other colors. Now the idea with dodging and burning is that you burn areas that are already dark. You want to emphasize those areas. And that's part of the sort of technique to make the lights and dark pop. It's by emphasizing what is already dark and then adding to the stuff that's already light, and we're going to do that in a minute on a different layer. And I'm kind of doing this quick and dirty, but you get the gist. When I'm done, I'm actually going to probably make this mask a little bit soft so it's not really rough to the viewer. But once I'm done, somebody else looking at this image is not even likely going to be able to tell where I did it. They might sense that something's been done, but they won't know exactly where. So say that's enough on the darks. And again, we can always come back and add more as we process and decide that we like something a little bit differently. Actually, I might actually add a little bit of darkness here, just so that the fog doesn't look quite as heavy. All right, now we're going to go to the dodge layer. So all I did is I kept the same brush. That's totally fine. The same opacity, the same flow to start, that's cool. And all I've done now is chosen the dodge. Now you can see right below it here on this mask though for the burn, all the little white specks. And that's just showing you where I've painted in with the dark. with the dark curve. So that, and to see this up close like I just did, basically you hold down the Alt key and you just click the mask, and that toggles it back and forth. Okay, so now we're gonna do the dodge. Now I don't do that to actually do the painting. I don't want to see it that close because I don't know what I'm doing. So it's much easier to toggle on and off. So in this case, I'm gonna emphasize some of these bright yellows and greens at the tops of the trees. Now, much like with darkening the fog to get rid of it, as I go over areas that have the fog with the light brush, then that's going to actually make it more notable that there's fog there. So I've got to think about that as I go about doing this. Do I want to emphasize the fog around this image? All right, a couple more. So I think that's probably good, at least for me, in terms of the light color. I might actually go back and just continue to darken. Now, as I go over areas that have already been shaded with this dark curve, they just keep getting darker. So that's the idea behind a low flow. It allows you to go over areas more than one time to sort of create the dramatic look that you want. We're getting close. As a sample image, this will be pretty good. All right, now, because I don't want the edges to be dramatic, I can also feather these edges to make them a little bit softer and have the blend be a little bit better. Before I do that though, I want to kind of just demonstrate the difference in the image. So, whoopsie. Let's start off with where we were. This is our original image. That's our original image. So we've gone back down to our background layer. Our original image, completely flat, not a lot of color, lots of fog. First step, adding some contrast, because that's the primary thing missing from a raw file. So you've added contrast, already getting some of the trees here to pop. From here, we darkened it a bit. Now we could have done this with exposure, although that would have toned down everything, whereas dragging down the curve, especially the curve that I selected, which is right here, is actually only darkening the midtones, right? That's what this adjustment is doing. If I pulled down from the top right, I would be darkening the lights, and if I pulled anything over here, I would be darkening the darkest areas of this image. So by choosing some place on this continuum, you're kind of being specific about the pixels that you want to adjust. And in this case, I just wanted to bring down the midtone. And if I wanted to, I could actually bring down the lights as well. And you can see I've already removed a little bit of fog. So I actually kind of like that. We're going to leave it. Now, when I turn on our darks, you can see where I've added dark. Now, right now, it's totally noticeable, but I'm going to change that in just a second. And then here is adding back some lights. So that sort of give you an idea of the effect. Now, to someone who didn't see me do it, it wouldn't be as notable, but because you're watching, you can sort of see it happening. Now, what we're going to do is when you click on the mask, this is the properties. If you don't see this icon on your toolbar, you can come to Windows and select Properties, and you'll see that it appears. So if you don't see it, that's cool. I have it embedded in my toolbar because I use it a lot, but if you don't, go ahead and just go to Windows and then select Properties, and that will make this little guy appear. With the mask selected, go ahead and just drag up the feather. And you can drag it up as far as you want. Now you see the change? If you look, particularly look here in this corner, bottom right hand corner, you'll see the most dramatic change as I drag this up. So it goes from being pretty obviously affected to just a little bit less affected. Now we're going to do the same thing. We turn on our lights. Again, because the properties is still here, as soon as I move to the mask, it goes back to 0 because this mask we haven't feathered yet. I'm going to go ahead and drag that up a little bit so it's not as dramatic. Now, the last thing I want to do is add a bit of a vignette. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. I could create yet another curve, or I can go about doing it on the burn curve and just focus it on the edges. So this time we're going to go ahead and make our brush bigger, and I'm actually going to take down the opacity a little bit and bring up the flow a little bit. It'll take us less strokes to get what we want. And now, again, with white, because we want to reveal dark, we're going to just do a little bit of vignetting. And as you can see, I'm focusing on the outer edges. And the reason you do that is because you want to draw attention to the center of the image. And by giving the dark edge there, you're actually giving that a buffer, and the eyes don't go really beyond the edge now. They just don't float out of the frame. So that's basically how you do this. The other thing though is you want to have movement in the frame, so you don't want to make it super dark and a big oval around your image or a circle around a square, because then you're confined, and that's actually frustrating too. So if you feel like you've done too much, so you can see here, this is what I've done around the edge. If you feel like there's too much and you want to create an entry and exit point, you would just go ahead, toggle back to black, maybe lessen the opacity a little bit, and just, you know, a little bit of opening so that you can see the eye could move. And it's not super noticeable on the mask itself, but you could see when I did this that it opened it up a little bit. And you just, it gives an eye a place to trail in and trail off, as well as move around. And I would say that with this particular image, we're pretty done. And I just want to stress, when you look at this, all we've done is play with contrast. That's all of these layers. That's all we've done. We added a little bit of clarity in Camera Raw, but our primary adjustment in Camera Raw was an adjustment of contrast, a little bit of exposure down, and that was just because the whole image was pretty bright from all the fog in the air, made the image bright. And then the dodge and burn layer was really just how we affected contrast in the image. I did not use saturation. These colors are all in the pixels that are already existing. So no saturation and no vibrance have been added to this. Now, if you wanted to pop this just slightly more, the only other thing that I might consider is looking at a levels adjustment. So go down to your layers adjustment, choose level, and see where your histogram is. But because we corrected the histogram in Camera Raw, you see we have a pretty balanced histogram here. So the only other thing I might consider, and we're going to try it, if it doesn't work we'll delete it, is just bringing down the midtones a wee bit. And I kind of like the result. So I went from 1.00 here to 0.94. And that's it. The image is finished and complete. So I hope that's been helpful, give you a few ideas about how to go about processing the images that you take with similar conditions. And I want to thank you for watching. Take care.